Hello, I just wanted to give another update as I was coding my little demo scene right here for the character creation scene for this RPG template. Um, I noticed I needed to have an option to control the way certain variables are set up in the class. So for instance, we've got the stats here, and all these stats have basically a description of what the stat is that will show up in this description thing, and in a name, in this case, mice, stamina, etc. And then this set of data is referenced in other areas. So, for instance, the players of course have stats. So, if player one here has stats, and I've set the stats as different float values as a default stats for the new player at the start of the game, and that's of course is a custom variable here, and that's set as a stats and a float list. That's what that's for, um, and that's referenced in a few places. So when I go back to my stats here, there's two options. There are two options. One, data items as list, and one as game data as list. And those options control whether or not the data is a list. So let's start with just data items as list. Currently, this is here in the data scriptable object. The stats are not as a list. It's just might is might, so name, description, etc. So let's go ahead and rebuild this structure just by clicking the export classes and waiting about a minute. All right, and now that that's complete, in the data here we can see that we still have might and description, but it's a list. Again, this is what it looked like before. You can't iterate through these with a for loop because there is no index. It's not a list. And with data items as list checked, there's now an index here, and you can iterate through these in a for loop. So that changes the way you can do your coding. The other one, game data as list, affects the game object, which is this is what can be serialized. So this is stuff that can be saved in your game. If you notice right here, game data gets saved is not checked, whereas for player, it is checked right there. And that means that up here we have player, we'll have scenes, we'll have main. So all of those are going to be checked down here, and therefore they're going to be shown up on this thing. Now, stats, the actual stats, might, stamina, this is not going to change. The descriptions aren't going to change during the game. So we don't need to save those in this file. Instead, the references on the player are going to change. So here we can see that the stats are float values right here, and as we do not yet have this game data as list checked, these are going to be you can't do these in a for loop. And if you look at the actual structure of the class, and this is going to be under player stats, you can see that it's just single floats here. That means in a script here, I can once the game is popular, I can simply type in game.player one dot stats dot might, and that's going to be equal, say, 12.5. Or I can say player, I can say float player might equals, we'll do player luck equals game dot player 2 dot stats dot luck. And that's one way of doing it. It's pretty straightforward. However, when it's not as a list, you can't iterate through these in a for loop. And for some cases, you might want to do that. And so what I'm going to do is click this on, set that on, and then I'm going to re-export these classes again. Again, it only takes just a minute. Now that this is done, you can see here that we have the index value right here. And instead of individual values, each stat entry has a name and a value. Again, we'll look at the code for this. So we'll load up player stats, and we'll see that's now a each one of these has these two values, and it's a list. So now in my code, and I had to comment out all my old code, which affects which uses the other method, and it was causing some issues because this code matters and is not part of the master class system, but it's just an example of use cases. We can say, first we can assign the game object, and then we'll just say game.player1.stats. And then we have to use an index dot name equals whatever, or value equals 12.132.3. How about that? Or we can do game.player.play. And now, so the one difference here is that you can't just use the common word. You can't just use might in this. However, you could write a script for that. So let me just quickly write one out. So I just wrote out two little functions here. This one will get a stats name based on the index. So if you know the index, you can get the name of it. And this one is the one here that makes it a little easier to write out some code with the common name. It will return the stat index given the name. So I could then say game.player1.stats and then put in here get stat name might, and then dot value equals 132.f and 132.3f. And so that way I don't really have to remember the index of the stats, especially if I start adding or removing stuff. That instead I abstract that out to this function, which just gives me the index. So in the end, especially if I know that I'm going to be adding or might be modifying the number of stats in the order there, where the index value will actually change, the better way of doing it is this way, where you get the stat name through code rather than the index. Now, if this is causing you an issue with speed or something, this for loop, I guess, if run enough, it could cause some speed issues, perhaps. And if that's the case, then maybe once you're locked in with your class structure, you can go through and just copy and paste that to the actual index that you know. So that's just one way of working with it. Let me delete that before I forget. And so that's just one option here. Depending on how you want to manage and work with your class structure, you can have those turned on and off as you see fit. Thanks.